Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna min fadlika 'ilman wa ta'liman innaka 'ala kulli shay'in qadir. Rabbana atina min ladunka rahmatan وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Thank you very, very much for the very warm, kind, generous introduction and also for the invitation to speak with you all today. The title of the talk, which I will just share my slides first. The title of the talk is Zakat and Ummah. And I want to use this time to really think about, at the heart of it, what is this discipline of Islamic law, or what we call fiqh in Arabic? What is it really about? And using these two windows into Islamic law, which is Ummah and Zakat, I want us to reflect upon what is the discipline as a whole about, and what is our duty exactly regarding this great heritage as believers. And Zakat and Ummah will be a way for us to explore this larger topic. I've got two affiliations here on my slide. I'm an associated lecturer at Cambridge Muslim College, where I was a lecturer on Islamic law for about 4 years. And currently I'm the chief executive of National Zakat Foundation in the United Kingdom. We're on a mission to localize zakat and how to develop a local system for distribution and collection within the United Kingdom. And the reason why I've shared both is because it's the intersection between the theoretical and the practical, or the intersection between the individual and the communal, where I find my activities and where I'd like to situate our exploration of fiqh today. So in terms of these two words, zakat in Arabic means purification and growth. Why is it called that? On the very, very basic level, it's because as time passes over a person's wealth, it no longer fully belongs to that person, and the person now must give that wealth to the needy, to its rightful recipients, in order to maintain the purity of the rest of the wealth. If you don't give the zakat out, your wealth becomes impure, because alongside your own wealth, you're consuming the wealth of somebody else. You could call it usurpation, you could call it theft, you could call it wrongful acquisition, oppression, whatever you want to call it. It's impurity, it's filth, and it's lack of blessing. It's stuntedness. How do you have growth and wholesomeness and a blessed wealth? Is you get the zakat out. So in its most basic level, zakat is for the advantage of the giver and for the maintaining the separation of what's yours from what's not yours, because Allah is obliged to right for others in wealth. But there are other angles to look at zakat as well, beyond merely the individual. And it's some of these other angles that I'd like us to reflect upon in a short survey that I'd like to share with you all today. And the main angle I'd like to look at is how zakat faces the collective. And the word for the collective of believers, as we find in the Sunnah, is the word Ummah. The word Ummah comes from the Arabic word Amma, which means to seek something out, to go towards something, to have a destination. So the Ummah is, you could call it a purposeful collective, people who've come together for a clear purpose. And the purpose is to be true and faithful to Allah and His Messenger. So how does zakat face this notion of Ummah, and why is Ummah so important? Those are the two things I'd like us to think about today. About Ummah, I've got just only very few remarks I'd like to make, but I will start with them to situate everything. What you have here are some words taken from hadiths. The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the believers to each other are like a building. Each part of it supports the other. So the Ummah, this collective of believers, is a building where each believer and you could say each collective of believers, each locality of believers is a brick. And your job here is to always reflect upon your relationship to the whole and what you can do to uphold the whole in your role here as a brick in the whole. Every brick is important to you because a damaged wall is a damaged project that you're maintaining. So it's a particular metaphor. And how do you uphold the whole? As obviously you uphold the people around you. So there's a sort of local impact for the global interest, which is this building. So local and global are two themes that might be of interest today. Another famous hadith, the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the believers are like a body. If one of it feels an ailment, the rest of it stays awake in pain and sleeplessness and fever and related. So again, what's the idea? Your life is connected to the life of the whole. If I cut any finger off or if there's any part of my body that detaches from the whole, it dies. So the idea of the believers to a believer like a body is you don't have any life in faith outside of this body. So it's essential to you to be a part. And then as you're a part, you're connected. And you have to be conscious of this connection and you have to respond because your life is connected to being a part of the body. But again, how do you do all of that? If you're a liver or a heart or a lung or a finger or a foot in this body, the way you contribute is by being the best liver you could be, or the best heart, or the best foot. So there's this idea of, again, local impact and global concern. And it's essential to your life. That's the metaphor of the body. The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hand of Allah is with the group. And the group here, the Arabic word is jama'ah. And so the idea is if you want to be aided by Allah, don't be on your own. If you want to be aided by Allah, find the group of believers, the group of the Ummah, because that's where the aid of Allah lies. So your support, your purpose, and your life is tied to making sure that your concern and your efforts are part of this whole, supporting the whole, the Ummah. Another hadith of our Prophet ﷺ, where he said, the devil is with the one who's by himself, and he is further away when there are two. And so the idea here is that your faith, your iman, is protected in ummah, even if it's an ummah of two. If all you can do is stand with another believer, that one act might save your iman. Because when you're alone, who's going to pick you up? Who's going to remind you? Who's going to support you? You are prey to the various ideas that make their ways into your head and into your heart. So 4 hadiths, different forms of image, all saying something very, very clear. If you look at the entirety of the Sunnah, how much of it is how to be with each other in a way that minimizes friction and maximizes cooperation. The prophetic encouragement to sadaqat and smiling and service, and the prophetic prohibition of lying and backbiting and stealing. All of this, the prophetic instructions of a fair market and the prophetic prohibitions of exploitative trade, all of that was to allow this ummah to come and thrive. Remove friction, maximize cooperation. If you look at the Holy Quran, this premise that you are worshipping in a group comes throughout the Holy Quran, right from the beginning. Right from the beginning, your Fatiha is in plural. You are the one that we are worshipping. You are the one whose help we seek. Guide us. So your initial prayer for your own salvation is a prayer made in a group. And even if on your own, even if you're locked away in a prison, solitary confinement, you are not alone when you pray. When you pray, you're in a group. Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Assalamu alayna wa ala ibadillahi salihin. Even in your sitting in the prayer, after you greet your Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, you greet us and all of the righteous people, because this is your group. You're always in a group when you pray, whether you're alone or not. Or the statements of the Prophet like, اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. Fear Allah and be you all with those who are true. And so this constant message, constant message of the group. And what I'd like you to think about today is this science or subject called Islamic law. And you might call it Sharia, and you might call it fiqh, this discipline that we study with the rules of what Muslims shouldn't do. I'd like you to think about it as a map, a blueprint, a model for how you establish Ummah, because that is at the heart of why we have a sacred law and why the sacred law looks the way that it does. I've got a very strange diagram here. It's meant to be three-dimensional, but I can't do three-dimensional pictures. These are some of the basic chapters you read when you study a book of fiqh. And this is, I'd like you to think about all of Sharia as a map for Ummah. It's a social and it's a political view of how to live as a Muslim. Muslims are not meant to look at the Islamic sacred law as individuals. Oh, that's how I pray. Oh, that's how I get married. Or that's how I trade. We are meant to look at it as a collective. What does it mean for us as a collective, the rulings of prayer or of zakat or of the other chapters of fiqh? Because that's when you'll realize why these chapters work the way that they do, why the details in them are the way that they are, because they are building a social vision. And whoever is concerned with the study or the dissemination of Islamic sacred law must by definition be some sort of social activist. I will use the word, and we can discuss afterwards whether that's a good word to use or not. You are trying to bring about a way of living in the world which approximates this strange diagram. If you look at the diagram in parts, I would claim almost every chapter of a fiqh book is in this diagram. Maybe there's some exceptions we can think about. So at the bottom, I'm calling it's three-dimensional, so it's like a vision of a community. It's like the building of Islam. And in the foundations of it are the chapters on ritual worship. The chapters of ritual worship, which in a normal fiqh book, you have purity, then you have prayer, then you have zakat, then you have fasting, which is Sawm, and then you have Hajj. These foundational chapters of any fiqh book, they, at the heart of it, there's something individual about them, something you have to do between you and God, and each of them have something social about them. Fasting, you might say the least, but as we experience fasting, you'd probably all agree that more people fast than pray because there's something communal and social in fasting. And it might come more in the sunnahs of fasting than the obligatory parts, which is to do with feeding each other, breaking fast together, tarawih, extra prayers, i'tikaf, which is again, it's a communal public space where people stay together and worship. So there's a very strong social energy, but you can say it's quite personal otherwise. You have the Hajj on the other side, which is about traveling, leaving your home, worshipping Allah at least once in your life. Amongst the global ummah, you really see yourself as a global ummah on the Hajj. But the strongest and the most central of these foundational pillars of Islam is the prayer and zakat. And that's why I've put them in a particular color, as I'll explain. So the prayer and the zakat, these come together about 28 times in the Holy Quran because they are probably the greatest social institutions of Islam. Prayer is something you do in a group. Prayer is something for the sake of which there's public spaces in which all believers are equal and you pray side by side. Doesn't matter your color, your skin, your language, your piety, it doesn't really matter at all. You stand shoulder to shoulder. It's an equalizing space. It builds ummah. an identity brought you together called Ummah. There's Friday prayers, which if you look at the rules of them are quite political and social. There's Eid prayers. There's prayers for fear. There's the Janazah prayer. The prayer is an angle to how society is organized around worship. And the other one, which is we'll look at some details today, is Zakat. Zakat, all of it is building an ummah of faith. I'm going to look at some discussions around Zakat in a little bit. So those two are the greatest foundational acts. But you don't stop a building in its foundation. And that's why the Sharia as a whole is a map. It's a model. And you could say it's a challenge. And what I mean by that is believers, wherever they are, their single duty is to strive to the best of their ability to bring this map about. At the heart of the map, upon this foundation, the most important pillar that upholds much of our social dealings is the question about courts. That's why our scholars say if Muslims live in a minority setting, one of the most important things they have to do is find a way to appoint a qadi, appoint a judge, appoint someone who can mediate between them in their disputes. Without a judge, if you think this is a building we're trying to construct, wherever we live, a building of Sharia in which Muslims can experience their faith as they were instructed, the most important thing after the foundation is qada. Because without qada, which I'm saying is the main pillar upholding this building, you don't really have family and trade law. So we get married, but then what if the husband isn't doing what he's meant to be doing in maintenance? The woman has no recourse within the Sharia, within our community of the faith. What about the children? And what about the inheritance? And what about all these chapters of fiqh that are to do with the family? All of them assume there's a pillar to which they can rely and turn to ensure that they are executed as best as possible, as close as possible to his vision. This is qada. And that's why it's one of the most important duties, wherever Muslims live in safety, is to have some form of Sharia mediation. And that's qada. On the left of it is all the rules to do with property and trade, all of them. And there's a number of chapters on this, buying and selling and money exchange and riba and rent contracts and all sorts of things. And then alongside that, in the old chapters of whether it's slavery or other things, they all come back to ultimately a vision of trade, if you like, in loose terms, and you have to have qada. Without Muslim mediation of qada, you're not going to have the ummah experiencing Sharia and living as an ummah. And that's why we have to always approximate to this map. And at the top, the canopy, the ceiling, if you have a building without a ceiling, you're all going to get wet. And when the elements come strong, your walls are going to fall down as well. And that's covered this ceiling, which really seals and protects this building of the Sharia, is the Kitab of Jihad in a classical fiqh book. The Kitab of Jihad, what it covers, it's the rules of how do you protect this building, essentially. What is your duty to, because in this building, we're going to settle the ummah. That's why this fiqh, Sharia, ummah are all intertwined, because what I'm trying to convey to you is Sharia is the map of how you preserve ummah. Because ummah is about purposefulness. And the purpose of the ummah is to serve or to be true to Allah and His Messenger through upholding this Sharia, this sacred code. And so the fiqh book is the map. How do you bring the ummah together? We want to settle them inside this structure. But what protects the structure? It's this notion of we have to protect the structure. We have to protect the ummah and discussions around that. The Kitab of Jihad is the only chapter in a classical fiqh book where you talk about political relations, politics, rulers, citizens, taxes. So anything to do with the political view, it's assumed in all of the fiqh. If you study classical fiqh, you'll find politics in prayer and politics in zakat and politics in various chapters. But which chapter actually discusses the political is just Kitab al-Jihad. And so I just want to say this is an important chapter. It's about our duty to protect, to preserve, so that this is a protected building. So that's what I wanted to just give you a sense that if we are not thinking about a communal vision, then we are not thinking about fiqh. We are not really practicing Sharia as we are meant to be. We have just atomized the sacred law and acted as individuals. And as we saw in the hadiths, if you want to exist as a finger away from the body, the finger dies. And the body suffers because it's without a finger. And so the whole notion is come together, and the map of it is here. And so what I want to say here is that think of fiqh as the foundation for a social and political vision, which believers are always challenged and tasked in every time and place to figure out what is the best way to bring this about, to make it exist, to live within it. Another way I'd like us to think about the fiqh tradition is call it a map of Medina. What does that mean? It's because the Prophet ﷺ, he had two stages, distinct stages in his mission. In Mecca, he was calling to Tawheed, explaining the faith, teaching the Quran, etc. And in Medina, he laid the foundations for Islamic civilization. He made the institutions of these pillars, the rules of zakat, the understanding of jihad, the rules of trade and marriage, the institution of qada, the whole map that we've just looked at. It's a map of Medina. When he left this earth, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our duty, how did Islam reach us? It was just through this map. Wherever Muslims went, they took this map with them. They gave it a life in the way that was appropriate to the best of their knowledge and ability in every time and place. And over the passage of time, this construction, with its faith and its pillar and its clear rules and its protection, was so compelling. Over the course of time, people across the land started entering it, and they didn't want to come out again. It's the success of Islam that's brought us here today. It is this civilizational da'wah, the civilizational call to God that our Prophet left the earth upon. That's what the fiqh is mapping out. And we have to look at all of fiqh through this lens, and that's why I'm going to look at zakat now. I'm not going to go into all of zakat. There's a lot of details that might be relevant to this framing. I just want to look at just a few of them. And then after that, I'm open to any discussions that people would like to have. There's 5 areas I'd like to look at in zakat. Some are exceedingly short. The top 2 give you a very basic vision of why zakat is such an interesting, powerful, sorry about that, ummah forming institution. And then the other 3 are just some possible discussions we can have which show its vast social and political dimensions of zakat. But if I look at the first 2, number 1 is really straightforward. According to the vast majority of scholars, zakat is only paid to Muslims. There's one category people have debated on, which is point number 5 on my slide. Hearts that are reconciled, I'll come to that. But as for a basic rule, zakat is only paid to Muslims. That is already telling you the purpose of zakat is forming ummah. The purpose of zakat is telling everybody you belong to a community and they have a right upon you. Just like the right of family. Faith is family. This is your belonging. Their right is greater on you than the right of somebody else. If 2 Muslims believe, if 2 human beings believe in Allah and His Messenger, that belief creates a tie between the 2 of them. This tie has to be honored. Zakat exists exclusively for the purpose of strengthening a tie. That's why I said zakat is fundamentally about building ummah. That's where you get an essential vision of zakat. Another thing you get an essential vision about zakat is this topic of localization, which I'd like to think about a little bit with all of you. If you do a simple survey across the schools of law, the classical schools of law, you'll find that all of them believe that localization is a part of zakat. They don't have a word in Arabic for localization, but they talk about transporting zakat or naql as zakat out of one's locality. What's the ruling of it? And nobody considers zakat location neutral. They all believe location is an essential part of the theory of zakat. And that's why some scholars, these are some of the stronger or the stricter opinions within the Hanbali and Shafi'i schools, some of them felt it was invalid, meaning if I'm living in a locality and I send my zakat to another locality, I haven't paid zakat yet until I do it again within my locality. That wasn't the strongest position in any of the legal schools, but it's a present position, meaning some people took it that far. What became a more dominant position, and you'll find this in the Shafi'i, Hanbali, and Maliki schools, is that they said that if I pay the zakat out of my locality to another locality, when there's need in my locality, then I'm sinful. So my zakat is valid, but I'm in sin. The lighter school on the spectrum is the Hanafi school, and they said, if I take zakat out of my locality, unless it's to, and we're going to see this in a little bit, people in greater need or to relatives, I'll come to that. Unless there's a particular reason that these scholars allowed, just taking zakat out of locality is sinful. Sorry, it is disliked. It's not the sunnah. It's not the way zakat is meant to be. So all I want you to look at this point number one is to really think that all of the classical fiqh, all of the schools of law, they all had this understanding that zakat is meant to be a localized phenomenon as part of the sunan of zakat, the proper conception of zakat. Why is that the case? Again, bring these two notions together. It's paid to Muslims, and part of its proper implementation, which is the meaning of sunnah, the proper way to go about worship, is it's paid where you live. If you put these two together, what is zakat creating? It's creating ummah. It's creating community within your sphere of influence and input. It's creating within you a sense that as a basic pillar of your iman, you need to know who are the Muslims where I live. If you don't even know who they are, or at least some amongst you don't know who the Muslims are, so you can organize them, you'll never have this pillar. That's why I said salat and zakat are the greatest pillars in the Sharia, because they lay the foundation for what comes afterwards. This duty of knowing who are the believers, what are their needs, how do we fulfill them? If you don't have specialists of your community, then how are you going to help any other community? You have let down your most basic sphere within the ummah, and that was your responsibility. If you like, the organs around you in the body metaphor, or the bricks around you. If you don't support them, then you're not doing your job. So this idea of the localization as an essential part of the properness of zakat, it's a really powerful theory. It really gives you a sense of your duty to ummah through this notion of zakat. Then these classical scholars debated, well, what does locality even mean? What are the boundaries of locality? All of them tied it to some notion of the city. Some took it very strict, like some of the Shafi'i scholars, that it really is the walls of your city. If you take it out of city walls, you're sinful, unless you know there's no need within city. Some said city and the surrounding areas, because every city would have like a, old cities would have like a walled outer wall, and they'd have fields and villages, but they're technically part of the city. So that's fine. It's considered part of the city. And some said, well, it could be the city and any distance in which you don't have to shorten your prayers. So let's say you shorten your prayers 50 miles, so it's within 50 miles. But so they all had this notion of locality, and it was an important thing to define. The Hanafi scholars just used the word balda. Again, for you, again, I'm going to say consider it city for your locality. They were less strict on defining some of these boundaries because of what I've said earlier, that it wasn't a question of sin, but a question of proper zakat to keep it within the city. Then they all had a discussion, when can zakat be transported? When can you take it out of locality? Some said never, which is the general thrust of the Hanbali and Shafi'i scholars. Never if there's need in the city. Only once you've satisfied city need, So you've kind of eradicated poverty where you are, then you start supporting the nearest city, then the nearest city, and so on. So it's like it's an economic model. Be strong and strengthen. The Maliki scholars had a position which I'm quite fond of, which is they say if there's greater need outside the city, then by all means take the zakat to where it's needed greater, where there's greater poverty, for example, on the condition that at least some of the zakat also stays in the city. Don't ignore your city altogether. Don't ignore your neighbors. Give them some of what you have, but then after that, by all means, if there's a greater issue somewhere else, think of them as well. The Hanafi scholars, which I said at the lighter end of the spectrum, said as long as you can establish greater need or a relative, like an alternative tie to the tie of neighborliness, then you're justified in transporting out of locality. And as they talked about reasons, what are the reasons for this localizing? They cite some hadiths which are only general in their wording, like take zakat from their rich and give it to their poor, which is the instructions of the Prophet ﷺ to Sayyidina Mu'adh, may Allah be pleased with him, which is from them to them. It's not meant to be from them to others. So from general looking at the wordings of some hadiths, the main thing is the early precedent. How did the companions establish zakat? From that, the scholars took the notion of localization is part of the proper management of zakat, part of the ritual itself. Other reasons they give for localizing is the feelings of the poor, that these are the people who live around you. They see your wealth, it pains them that your wealth leaves out to others when they're living next to you and they don't have a share of it. Again, it's about neighborliness, and that fits into point number 3, which I think is a very important point for us to theorize, which is the right of the neighbor. So if there's a believer who's near you, physically near you, geographically near you, by virtue of nearness, they have a right. And that right has to be thought about. And that's what I think for us to take away practically from this topic is not necessarily about fighting people about where the zakat goes, but to really stress, do you know the believer who's near you has a special right of nearness? What are we doing for them? If we don't start really thinking about this conversation, we'll never build that building, the building of Sharia, because it stands on Salat and Zakat, before you can really build something of consequence that will protect you and protect your Iman. Some scholars added to this, it was not a primary reason, but it exists in the classical fiqh, questions about transportation. Obviously, because if you take wealth away from locality, there's costs and risks. So it's a sort of pragmatic reason for localizing. So this is one instance of zakat. It's a topic in the classical fiqh. It really gives you a notion of how do you build an ummah, and where's your sphere of influence that you really have to develop. So it's a very important insight, the question of localization. So those two I thought were quite primary. Paid to Muslims, paid locally. This is now just some other discussions which are illustrative of how zakat can only be understood properly within the map of this wider building that the Sharia is providing us. Zakat was conceived of originally and within the classical fiqh as something which is managed centrally because it's considered almost a part of public taxation. It's something which is between you and Allah, but it's also between you and the community, between you and the political entity. So it's worship, but it's like tax as well. So it has two properties. And that's why there were salaried zakat collectors. The Quran speaks about it, calling them the amilin. In the fiqh, they're called musaddiqs or sa'is. These were people employed, paid for by the zakat, and their job was collect, preserve, distribute. They would collect gold, silver, they would collect animals, they would collect agricultural produce. They would have to take, for example, animals to a pasture, make sure they're looked after and fed and shepherded, and then taken off to the right family. They would keep records about the zakat paid, not paid. They would assess people who are asking for zakat. It's a whole system. and it's a system that's run by zakat. Otherwise, zakat would be a liability to other funds. Zakat is not a liability; it's only an advantage to the community. So that's a place where zakat, again, its vision is communal, social, political. It's not just between you and somebody. The total map that we have to serve. And another sub-discussion here within zakat is a division that the classical fiqh talks about, and they take it back to the time of Sayyidina Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, which is a division between private and public wealth. Private wealth is gold, silver, and trade goods. Public wealth is animals and agriculture. These are the zakatable items. So from the time of Sayyidina Uthman, there was a rule made, and it stayed forever after that, which was that government collectors have no right to ask people to pay the zakat of their private wealth. Meaning they can ask them, but they have no right to enter their homes. They have no right to ask them, how much gold do you have? They have no right to say, pay us your gold. They had none of these rights. And the reason for this distinction was to protect privacy, to make sure that zakat is not an excuse for governments to impinge on the privacy of people. And so even in the rules of zakat, there's discussions to figure out, well, how does the private connect to the public, and how do you protect those boundaries? Public wealth, on the other hand, which was your zakat on animals, your zakat on agriculture, this was public. The collectors were going to people field to field, and they would take records, they would count your animals, they would take your zakat, they would negotiate with you, which animal should we take, and so on. This you had no right to not pay to them, but not the private. So it's an interesting place within the zakat, which is the boundary of the political and the private. Another interesting sub-discussion, like I'm giving you a quick survey of how zakat is so tied to the social political vision, is this sub-topic called the ashir. One second. So the ashir is a sort... the ashir is an import tax collector. Sayyidina Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, laid out rules for the ashir. And the idea was that all the known trade routes between Muslim territory and non-Muslim territory would have a tax collector there. And all territories had this. It's an import tax. And so people bringing in goods from the border, if these people were Muslims, the ashir would take the zakat of those trade goods. And if those people were non-Muslim, he would, but they're citizens, he will take another tax rate. It's not called zakat. And if they were what you can call harbis, which are citizens of other territory, the ashir would either take 10%. That's the rate Sayyidina Umar fixed for the residents of other territories. It's a 10% tax, or whatever they charge our traders. Meaning, if they let our traders in for free, we'll let their traders in for free. It's a sort of international trade. And so here again, you see how zakat is just part of a larger sort of tax system, which is sensitive to you could say the faith duties of people. If you're a Muslim, then what we're going to take is a zakat rate from you. But again, it's how zakat is institutionalized as part of a larger system. Zakat within the building, in the image that I've shown you earlier. I've got just two small discussions, and then we're done in terms of the survey, and I'm happy to explore any angle that's of interest to you. One of the 8 categories of zakat that I mentioned in the Holy Quran are zakat is paid to people in the way of God, fi sabilillah. In most of the classical fiqh, this was a reference to people who actually fight, warriors, communal defense. Because in early Islam, there was no such thing as a standing army. And so how do you defend your territory? It's that people sometimes will just be called, we need you now to come and fight, come and defend, come and support. And so people who are poor, who can't join the effort, but they're strong, they have a right in the zakat to equip them so they can go. So it's just an angle within the zakat, how zakat can't be separated from the communal social vision. In later Islam, as time goes on, it became increasingly popular for scholars to include within this category Islamic scholarship, because Islamic scholars are the defense, if you like. If you look at the map we saw earlier, the canopy which protects, scholarship is part of the canopy. If you don't have a healthy culture and presence and cultivation of scholarship, you will not be able to protect this building of faith. You'll not be able to either respond to challenges and to really make sure that you move as a community in the most appropriate way without scholarship. And so over time became increasingly popular to say scholars and people who are devoted to scholarship have a right in zakat support if they can't support themselves. Another category of zakat which shows this interplay of the zakat and the communal, the zakat and the political and the social, is a category in the Holy Quran which translates as the hearts brought close. وَالْمُؤَلَّفَتْ قُلُوبُهُمْ. What does this mean? Scholars have two broad interpretations on this. If you go across, again, the classical schools of law, most of them, I'd say, if I can use the word most, interpret this politically, which I'll come back to in a moment what that means. Some of them interpret it individually. So the individual interpretation, they say is, again, they've differed. So some scholars, so some of the Maliki scholars say this, is if there's somebody non-Muslim, they're close to Islam, but they are almost like afraid to convert, because conversion is leaving one ummah for a new ummah. When people convert, they're often abandoned by families, rejected by loved ones, their support system is cut off. It's very traumatic. So there's this fear. I'm about to cut off from all of my support system. Will I be supported on the other side, or will I just suffer? And so these scholars say, well, this form of zakat it's a payment to such people to say, no, we're here to look after you. You have a right on our public funds. Come and join us. You are part of Ummah. So it's Ummah extending out to people who want to join and are a little bit afraid. And so the zakat is saying, come. Zakat's a lifeline within, and it extends to those who want to join. And they need this sort of support or encouragement. Some scholars also within this individual interpretation, which is what the Shafi'i scholars prefer, is that it's for new Muslims. They have already converted, but they're alienated, either from the community, or they're just feeling they don't belong, they're scared, they're worried, and they actually are thinking of going back. And so they also have a right on the public funds of zakat to say, no, listen, this is your right, this is your money, you're here, you belong here. So zakat is again cementing a tie of ummah for the individual, where it's feared it will break. The other angle of zakat is not individual, but it's political. And this is the only way the Hanafis and Hanbalis looked at it. It's a major interpretation also in the Shafi'is, and it's the early Malikis as well. That's why I'd suggest it's probably the majority reading, which it's not to do with individuals and their salvation. It's to do with the protection of the community as a whole. And how does it work? It works as follows. It's only paid by an imam or a political leader. It's only paid with centralized funds. It's not me as the individual paying somebody my £20 or £100. It's paid, zakat funds are pooled centrally, and the sort of representative of the ummah or the community of that political Muslim group is seeking to secure an advantage for the Muslim group. If you look at the old fiqh, it's very tribal how they describe this. There's like, because in tribal politics, you get a collection of people with a chieftain, and you secure an advantage with that chieftain. You maybe give gifts, you give support, financial support. We call it soft power in modern parlance. Countries give aid, but it's really about securing particular ties. So it's a form of soft power paid by a leader to the leader of another group in order to secure some safety or protection or advantage for the Muslim group in a time or a situation of turbulence and fear and uncertainty. So zakat is being used strategically to create strategic alliances to protect this Muslim group. When people theorized this, why is this happening? Some of the scholars, this is Al-Imam al-Sarakhsi of the Hanafi school, he said, oh, this is allowed because it's the poor contributing to the jihad effort. Again, if you go back to the building, there's this notion of the essential jihad effort. How do you protect the ummah? So the poor can't fight. Their contribution is that some of the zakat collected for them is being used strategically to protect the ummah. That's the basic idea. It's a discussion to again show how zakat can't be studied without its view towards the whole and the protection of the ummah. Scholars had a debate whether this category is still relevant after Islam became strong. And so the most popular position within the Hanafi school, following on from Sayyidina Umar and the practice of the early caliphs, is that when Islam became strong, there was no reason to sort of pay other chieftains for securing an advantage, because that's an act of weakness. And now Islam is strong. It's only when Islam was weak did you need such forms of alliance. And so there's a debate on the category. Is it still practiced? What's its interpretation? But I wanted just to share it with you as another angle into the social political world of zakat. And so that's all I wanted to share, my little survey. And I just want to go back to the picture just to show you that all of the fiqh connects to all of the fiqh. You can never say, oh, I'm thinking of prayer right now. I'm not currently thinking about the community. I'm not currently thinking about politics. I'm not currently thinking about protection. You can't do that. Prayer is not designed like that. And you will only understand the full dimensions of prayer when you see it through the entire map. All of the fiqh upholds and explains all of the fiqh. And all our scholars say is our duty as a community, and that's how we protect community, is to create this picture wherever we are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam.
نفعنا الله بك Dr. Sohail. I really enjoyed your presentation. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. It was incredibly engaging in the sense that I think the central tenet or theme of the presentation, and I think the larger project, is to get Muslims who are in the here and now to understand both the pre-modern implications of what zakat meant to the best of generations of Sahaba radhiyallahu alayhim and successive Muslim polities, and to get them to understand what that can look like in modernity, which I think is a very complicated question. Dr. Sohail, my primary question will refer back to the diagram that you shared, which I thought was incredibly well structured. I'm a visual learner, so for me that was very easy to make sense of.
It was my first attempt to draw this, so it's
Alhamdulillah, it was very good. I think that for the lay Muslim believer, their engagement with zakat typically will come first in their life when they learn the Arkan al-Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam. They'll get a very, I think, elementary explanation of what it is. It's an amount paid in a year towards a select category or group of people. And as one grows older and one begins to earn, they begin to realize that it's a little bit more complicated than that, and there are some stipulations and some conditions. The part of the discourse today about zakat is primarily its negligence, especially by earners who are living in the Western world. There seems to be, I don't want to say abandonment, but and I'll give an example, and then I want to seek your perspective, because maybe it's different in the United Kingdom. In the state of Minnesota, where I live, there's an incredibly diverse and large Muslim community, primarily of East African descent. One of our masajid led a 2-year study where they polled about 1,200 working class Muslim professionals, or young Muslim professionals, about zakat, how they pay it, when they pay it, and to whom they pay it. And they found that a significant number of those who were surveyed didn't even pay zakat. It wasn't on their radar. They gave sadaqah, of course, in Ramadan, they gave alms and other forms, but the obligation of zakat was lost on them. And so I'm curious to know what the situation might be in the United Kingdom as you lead a major zakat organization, but is there just a general a lack of real solid knowledge about zakat, which then leads to negligence. Is that something that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, so I think so. I haven't done any proper surveying in the UK. It's something we're looking to do now. But definitely my guess is very similar to what you've described with data, that many Muslims who should be paying aren't paying. And I agree with you. I feel uh, a good contributor to this phenomenon is that people haven't been given any understanding of why are we paying zakat. And the truth of the matter is, it looks like a very small amount of money in many cases. It's 2.5% of particular form of wealth. For many people, if I've got a mortgage, if I've got any sort of loan, it
Mhm.
becomes zero.
Right.
And many middle class working people, they have loans and they're juggling things. So it doesn't look like a lot of money. And I give charity anyway, so I don't really need to look into this zakat thing.
Mm.
And if we were able to present zakat as a sort of, again, as I've been trying to discuss here, a really fundamental contribution to how you support Ummah and how you are part of the narrative of preserving faith where you live, I think it will give people a context within which to understand it. So I do feel lack of a context is a contributor to lack of practice. Obviously, there'll be other contributors as well, like lack of religiosity, but I don't think that's the only one. Just
Right.
like fasting. Remember, I said again, haven't done a survey on it. All anecdotal evidence suggests more people fast in Ramadan than pray outside
Right.
of Ramadan. Why would that happen? It's not that they're irreligious, but this particular activity taps into a part of them that wants to take part in the community, and they don't have as much of a drive in prayer. So similarly, if we had a good narrative on zakat, I wouldn't be surprised if because zakat is literally once a year, and everyone wants to feel like they belong. Like we all feel bad when
Right.
particular triggers of community are hit, as are happening right now. May Allah protect and preserve and give victory to our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. And so
Mm.
this a notion of community and belonging and contribution, if it's done right, yeah, I don't see why you wouldn't have more people pay zakat than fast, more people fast than pray. I'm not saying that's right,
Mm.
but there's no reason why it shouldn't be happening if the narrative was right. And I think that's our duty as teachers.
No. Which I concur with. And I think that, and I would encourage you, Dr. Sohail, to look into really this data collection because it can give us an insight into not necessarily a broad cross section, but perhaps what the general tenor or the attitude towards zakat is. But my second question then is a major part of the discussion today was that zakat historically and was conceived as or later as a major part and parcel of polity and state building for Muslim communities. Yani was of course it's an individual pious act that is fard on every believer, but over time as the Muslim communities first among the Khulafa al-Rashidin and then the later successive Muslim dynasties grew, it became a pillar of polities and states. In the absence of a unified Muslim polity or state and the emergence of the nation state, what happens to zakat, particularly its collection, its management, its centralization? Now, a lot of that work, of course, and of course, if you look at the Q&A box, this is outsourced to charity and relief organizations.
Mhm.
What happens to our conception of this when it's divorced from its original context?
Yeah, and so I guess that's where the scholarly challenge comes in, is what is the correct way to be true to the institution as a whole today? So if you look at a metaphor, first of all, a prayer, I have to start praying 5 times a day, and that's quite clear. But if in my community there's no mosque, I haven't yet established prayer within the community. And so it's by all means, we want to teach everyone this is how you pray, this is what you recite, and pray 5 times a day. But that's not the end of the picture. Then we've got to figure out, well, how do you pray in community? Then you've got to figure out, well, how do you make a mosque, which is permanent? And so there's a direction of travel. It doesn't stop on the first brick. You're trying to create an institution. So in Zakat, the notion of charity organization is excellent. It's because not everyone's going to have the ability to do something by themselves and be specialized and so on. So it's a good service. It brings something together. By all means, everyone should check the trustworthiness of it. But the question I'm going to ask is, does it stop there? Have we done and dusted now? I've paid my zakat, I've got nothing else to do. I'm saying no, that's not right. I'm saying zakat is not just something you do to get done. It has a message for how you as a community are meant to be functioning. And so we now have to go to level 2, just like in prayer. Then there's level 3, then there's level 4. And those levels will only work if we really think about zakat from the beginning and up, from ground zero. Start from fresh. What is this institution teaching us? And that's why I'm going to suggest at some part of zakat, there has to be a localization view. Forget about, is it fard sunnah 100%, not 100%? That's another question. But the fact that we need to have a vision of where we live, to have people who are specialized in local need, who can support us in distributing our zakat, who can lay the foundation for the next level of building our local ummah, we have to have that vision. If you don't have that vision, you are not fulfilling your vow, if you like, to uphold the Sharia of our Prophet ﷺ to the best of your ability. You're stopping somewhere. That's why every generation has to improve what they've inherited. You can't just pass it on. So we, as second, third generation migrants, by all means, people came to the lands where I'm assuming most people here are in a Western country. They, the first generation just bring Iman essentially, and the Quran studies and mosque, and they've done something. But then what are you going to do? And as we go, we build up the structure. So I will say there has to be a localization view. It's not enough to not have that. And alongside that, we can think about the other conversations, whether it's categories of zakat, whether it's the right balance of local and global. Those will come. They need some intellectual guidance. But the basic idea of building your system where you are is essential. Charities are useful, but they're not the whole picture.
And I think that sometimes this getting into the weeds and as you mentioned, the fiqh tradition is vast. There are a multiplicity of opinions. There's a multi-vocality, all speaking and searching for the one truth of the religion. But this is a blessing in many ways, that different polities can adopt a different fiqh approach on what constitutes or what makes sense for them. The challenge of that, and I want to pose this to you, Dr. Sohail, is that critics of our tradition, they make the claim that the ossification, the drying of the leaves or of the ink, so to speak, of the fiqh tradition locks us into systems which cannot contend with the challenge of modern living. And as someone who has done a lot of shari'i work and academic study on early Ḥanafī authorities and classical authorities, what is our defense against this idea that there's an ossification that does not allow us to think in new ways or to meet the challenge of here and now?
You use this nice metaphor of the drying up of the leaves. I've not heard that metaphor, but it's quite cool, because that's what happens in autumn, and then you have winter, and then you have spring. And so if people are saying it's ossified, they're describing something real. I mean, they've seen it, and they've seen scholars not able to provide, or not appearing to provide, useful, meaningful solutions. And so they're looking elsewhere. That's just a fact. It's a experience. You can't deny that fact if people observe and feel that. But our question is just, where do we go from here? And where you go from here, you only have so many options. If your claim is to be true to Allah and His Messenger, because think of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah not just as a word to become a Muslim. It's like your pledge of allegiance.
No.
I belong to Allah and His Messenger before I belong to anybody else. That's what it's your statement of you. It's your identity. It's the beginning of the map. That's why in my picture of the pillars, I didn't have the first pillar, Shahadatan la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, because A, it hasn't got a chapter in the fiqh, and B, it's the thing that enters you. This map is the consequence of that. It's a translation of that.
No.
And so if that's your starting point, you only have so many options to go forward from here. You can invent something from scratch, or you can engage with what's gone before. In most fields of learning across secular and non-secular, it's not considered wisdom to not build on the insights of those who've gone before.
No.
So that's just part number one. There has to be study. After that, what do you do with that study? That's where, people have their own tastes and flavors. But what I would claim and what I've seen is that there is such incredible depth in the Islamic scholarly tradition. Uh, we have to allow it to speak to us. What's happened in the last 100 or so years is the Muslim world's been colonized, and we've developed very protective and, I don't know, maybe you can call it narrow, maybe that's a subjective statement,
Mm,
ways to read the tradition because we're just trying to preserve it in a time of challenge. What we have to do now is just dive into it.
mm,
Let it speak to you. Don't be narrow. It's got vastness in it. It's got wisdom. It's supported the Muslims across very turbulent times across history. The tools of classical Islamic law will give you the courage and the ability to provide solutions when you by yourself would be too scared. It gives you courage and clarity. So I'll say there's a lot it has to offer. And
no,
we have to work towards the spring, and spring will come, God willing.
wonderful. I really appreciate that insight, Dr. Sohail. I think that and this leads to another 1 second. Yeah. This leads to a very good question. Obviously, among Muslims who are living in the West, as this is our experience primarily, I'm sure there are likewise probably analogous discourses in Muslim majority nations, but especially in the West, we are offered really two systems or really one global system, but there's a perception that some countries are more market economy, capitalist systems, and there are some countries which have more socialist or I don't think we really have anything that resembles communism as it was understood or theorized by its intellectual forefathers. But obviously, some Nordic states have systems which really build a very strong or very dynamic social net so as to serve
Mhm,
the communities.
mhm,
And of course, that comes with high taxation and so on and so forth.
mhm.
There is a desire, I think, on the part of Muslims to read zakat as being part and parcel of one of these two systems. What do we make of the claim that zakat is necessarily a redistribution of wealth in the socialist model, or that it's a godly uh, uh, way of sharing wealth in a capitalist system, not unsimilar or dissimilar to uh, capitalism's growth alongside the church, tithing for Catholics and Protestants, kind of the forefathers of that system. Well, how do we situate our zakat in these economic systems? And
That's a
what do you make of
fabulous
these
question.
claims? I mean, a lot of young people say, you'll see on social media, or you'll see on, college campuses, Muslims in the West, especially in the US, zakat is a socialist endeavor because it's the redistribution of wealth.
Mm.
And then you'll find other Muslims saying, well, no, Islam is a market economy religion, is a religion of traders and merchants. It can never be this way, but it's just a godly act of individual piety and charity. What do we make of that?
That's very, very good. Excellent. Really good insight. Happy to take your insights on that as well. What comes to mind as you're speaking is, first of all, I'm going to talk classically, and then we'll talk about what it might mean today. So classically, definitely, if you look through the Islamic law, Islamic tradition, equality does not seem like an ideal that the books of fiqh are talking about. Everyone should be the same. And so I would not call it an equalizing system. And that's why zakat, if you look at the rules, it's on a very particular form of wealth because it's not meant to be a burden for those who pay. Uh, so it's not equalizing. But what it is doing, it's reminding those who have that you have a fundamental duty of care to those who don't have. And your absolute duty in belonging to this community is looking after them. And so it says payment of care as duty. It's not at all threatening wealth. And if you look at the rules, there's all forms of wealth which are not touched at all by zakat. And so I wouldn't call it a fundamental equalizer, but I'll call it's a reminder of duties. And the Islamic law is a lot about duties and responsibilities. You're rich, it's fine. Allah made you rich. It just gives you a duty of care. And zakat is the most fundamental expression of that duty. This is the first thing. So uh, the only question of when you talked about um, the only question when you talk about in the modern conception of big states and small states, it's a very hard thing to say. Classical Islamic law wasn't fond of taxes beyond the very basic ones, and it wasn't a welfare state run by government. It was a welfare community run by a charitable impetus, and it functioned very successfully through public charity, through awqaf. It was really about you, the people, have an impetus. Zakat is just the foundation. What comes off the back of that is quite remarkable. So I'd say it's the charitable society. It's not a heavy taxed and heavy government society. That's the classical view.
Right.
We live in a different world today, and I don't have the best answer for you in terms of what's the best kind of government that we should be supporting. It's a different kind of a world than the simple model of the past.
I think it's important to situate, and we have to resist the urge to think about our moment now, independent of the long tradition that produced it. And I think that there's a tendency on the part of especially younger Muslims, many who are very active in social media or on social causes rather, to of course see analogs between their charitable giving and I think various social or welfare programs, but really being able to state our position vocally and to say, look, this is what the early Muslim communities did, this is what their successor communities did. Of course, there's a challenge of contact with the West and colonialism and a number of those systems and their antecedent consequences. But I think that it's essential that we do think about ourselves as not entirely unique, but separate in many ways, and we have to live with any other people. And now there's a challenge of the Muslim living in these non-Muslim majority states. Hayakallah, Dr. Sohail. I have many questions for you. I feel that I could ask you and pester you with questions.
Questions are fabulous, alhamdulillah. They're very
SubhanAllah.
good.
But I do want to turn it over to the audience because they've asked a number of good questions, and if you have them up, Dr. Sohail, we can look at them together. But I think that they're mostly on one axis. A great deal of them, I think all four of them relate in one way or another to Muslims organizing in the West and the question of zakat. And that might branch off into question one. Let's look at question one perhaps. What are your insights on the widespread debate over zakat eligibility within North American organizations as they vie for zakat eligibility status under the Fi Sabilillah banner? I don't think this is exclusive to North America. I think this is something that's probably happening in the United Kingdom and really in the West. But there is this impetus on the part of Muslim organizations, whether they are. So I think the case for charity and relief organizations is fairly clear cut and contentious, but easy to understand. And then we have a number of other Muslim organizations. Some might be dedicated to research. Some might be dedicated to a service in the local community, yani food banks or soup kitchens. Some might be dedicated to ta'aleem of a certain sort where there is no profit model. They make the claim that they're collecting zakat under the banner of Fi Sabilillah, and this is something that has been widely critiqued by a number of voices and actors. What do we make of this category, Dr. Sohail? Dr. Sohail, we talked very briefly, or actually for at length, what the classical conception of Fi Sabilillah constituted. And obviously the loss of jihad necessarily as an institution or its diminished importance in modernity has led to, I think, a widening of the later classical scope of supporting scholarship, which is now supports social and community endeavors. So what do we make of this? It's a touchy subject. It's a minefield, but it's something that I think we need clarity on.
Yeah, I'm not going to give a categorical answer here. I'm going to say that definitely in the classical fiqh, I can't think of an exception right now, is that the zakat goes to individual people. Zakat is a payment to a human being.
No.
Because of everything I've been hinting at in my presentation, which is it's this tie and haqq that comes about because someone's in the ummah and they have a right to this wealth of yours and have a relationship with you as a result of that.
No.
So the idea of paying zakat to a non-human, like sort of a collective entity,
No.
is not a classical position. Having said that, the reason why I'm not inclined to give a categorical answer here is just because a number of fiqh councils. If you look at the fiqh council fatwas over the last 20 years,
No,
fiqh council of Jeddah and Sharia, fatwas of Darul Ifta of Egypt, and if you look at these contemporary fiqh discussions, they do countenance the payment of zakat to institutions, and they have different versions of this.
no,
Like, it goes back to this notion that the zakat has within it, as I hinted at briefly in the presentation, which is a faith protecting duty. Is that if Muslims have no scholars in their midst, and I've talked about scholarship now, they've got no scholars in their midst, then who's going to protect Islam or explain how to have belief, how to reconcile belief with evolution, or how to engage politically in a way that supports in line with the Sharia? Who's going to guide the community? If there's no guidance, then there's no community, in a couple of generations. And so if you have no structure and you have no way to run a school or a college which is going to pay, which is going to engage in education, then you're really struggling. And zakat is meant to be serving the community in this way. That's why you get many modern councils in different conditions have supported some form of this.
no,
Those who don't support some form of this, still they found a way around it. So you'll
no,
find, for example, in the subcontinent in the 19th century fatwas, strict Hanafi fatwas, but even they found ways to run madrasas off of zakat.
no,
But they would do it, maybe pay the student to hold it for the student, make the student represent. So you can find a way that it's still an individual, but really it's running the school.
no,
So all I'll say is a lot of modern discussion around that, and it's not in my capacity or power or ability or place to say what's wrong in this.
no.
Rather, it's been seen as a necessity, and different people have tried different ways to support it. That's all I'll say. So there's discussions. This is the boundary of it. And other than that, all I'll say to the people here is you'll have to formulate your opinion. You'll have to consult your scholars, but it's a very vivid and vibrant debate. It's not by any means a closed and done deal in this question.
I echo this. I think that provides a good historical precedent for, these are not simply questions that are challenging here and now for us in Canada, North America, the United Kingdom, Scotland, wherever Muslims may be living as an aqliyya. But there are questions that even Muslims, both living before the coming of the colonial period and after the colonial period, had to contend with. And I think that the example of madaris and charitable organizations or brotherhoods or zawiyas, we find that zakat is a fundamental pillar for an entire social institution that is really based around the giving of wealth from those who have it to those who do not. And so awqaf comes to mind, charitable organizations come to mind, a number of different institutions which are supported by that. But I think this is a good open-ended way to answer the question. And I think that a lot of the hoo-ha about it in the West really comes from an anxiety about the misappropriation of those funds, which I think is not necessarily an altogether unfounded concern, but I think it does obscure sometimes the forest for the trees. I think I would prefer to have husn adhan for the brothers and sisters who are taking time out of their lives to often run these projects without pay and without thanks many of the time. I think that people should have a little bit more husn adhan for their brothers and sisters. I want to finish with this question, inshallah ta'ala, that the attendee asked. Could you provide a more detailed discussion on ongoing discourses between local and international zakat donations? A significant number of Muslims in Canada and North America tend to lean towards overseas donations, driven by the perception that Muslim majority countries are experiencing greater economic challenges. But I think on its face, a lot of the time this is true. The GDP and the quality of life in Canada and North America and the United Kingdom is significantly higher than many Muslim majority states. But there is a perception that crises are only happening over there. I mean, this is often very exacerbated or highlighted by social media, by campaigns to support orphans or flooding or fires or Allah musta'an, mathalan. And so the natural disasters, economic disasters, human movement, migration, crises, there's a number of things that orient the Muslim towards the West. And sometimes I can't help but think, or towards the East, of the old commercials that would come on here in North America of these graying old men in villages in remote parts of Africa or Asia, asking you on the late night television, $1 a day will support this child, so on and so forth. So there's a perception that all financial need is relegated to the East. even though in many ways there's need right here in the West. There are Muslims who are living in poverty, Muslims who are unhoused, Muslims who are living paycheck to paycheck, who are food insecure, Allah musta'an. So I think this is what the questioner might be getting at. But what do you make of this, Dr. Sohail? Does our the majority of our attention being oriented towards the East take away from challenges that might present themselves right here at home or in our backyards?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your framing and answering it also. From your point of view, I fully support what you've said. There's a few issues here, right? So one issue is we tend to only see need where the marketing is driving us, or the news is driving us. When the news is focusing on one war, you'll forget all the other wars that are on the planet. Or if the marketing of particular conversations are talking about one part of the world, you'll forget everything else. And so we need to be bigger than that. And we need to really think hard about where we can make the greatest impact and where we have to. So there's two parts to this question. That's why I said if you're going to take zakat to the next level, there has to be a localization view. And I'm not saying all of it, because I agree with the fact that uh, we might be living, some of us, in a privileged setting, and we have ties back home, we have families, we have relatives, we have connections. We're not meant to cut our connections. We're meant to nurture all of our connections. But just add to the list of connections the neighbor in faith. That's what I've talked about in this localization fact. And it's quite sad when people don't know the needs literally down the road and they've got their head always on needs somewhere else. It shows that they're not really concerned the way they're meant to be concerned. And there's a lot of need and poverty. In the UK, Muslims are consistently the poorest faith community inside the United Kingdom. And many people say, well, I'm doing fine and my friends are doing fine, but that's the whole point. You haven't yet thought about your ummah where you are outside of your ethnicity and your professional class. That's the whole point of this Sharia vision we've looked at. Your ummah is everyone who says La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. If you open your eyes, you'll see probably, most likely, there's a lot of struggles people face where you are. You can't say I've got no interest in that. That's your greater duty by virtue of closeness. One more thing that comes up in this conversation of local versus international is this idea of return on investment.
Hmm.
Because giving someone housing and food in London for a month, what are you looking at? £2,500, £2,000, £1,500? For that money, in some place in Africa, I'd keep a family alive for a year. Or I could help 10 families. And so when you do the calculation of return on investment, always you'd get an idea that overseas you get more return. And I'm not fond of this looking at charity as a return on investment question. If you're giving gifts to a beloved person, you don't then say, oh, actually, if I gave them less or if I instead did something else, everything has its place. And so the return on investment we have to think about is the return of investment in terms of the reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in terms of making charts and graphs and profit and loss. It's not that type of framing. And so what I tell people is just look in your heart, ask Allah to guide you. What is the best way for you to divide your zakat and pay it? That's all you have to do. It isn't complicated. And as long as we have a vision for what's local, I'm also not claiming 100%, don't think about what's outside, because the problem with that is we might be in danger of the finger leaving the body. Like there's a sense of you're a part of a whole, you have to have a concern. And if you're in a place of the world where generally the per capita income is good and there's others struggling, the fact of some support, that makes sense to me personally. That's why I said in the presentation, I'm fond of the Maliki discussion, because they're the most explicit people who say, if there's greater need out of locality, by all means you can send zakat, as long as there's also zakat left here as well. So this idea of the balancing, I'm fond of that. But that's what I'd say here.
Hayakallah. I think this is an excellent point to end off on, Dr. Suhail, that the Muslim needs to think about his obligations in the ways that make sense to him and that can fill needs that he is most able to fill. And I think this is the approach that we should take. And it's difficult sometimes not to get caught up in the discourse about, of course, we tend to I don't want to say be overly legal, but we've sometimes minimized our perception of the Sharia of Islam down to questions of legality, which is important and essential, but there is this overarching legalism that hangs over many people, which is, alhamdulillah, a good indicator that the person is aware of the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and is concerned with halal and haram, but it can sometimes muddy the water when you are just so in the weeds of things that they prohibit you from acting. And I think that we are incredibly grateful to have scholars like you in our communities who both understand this on a theoretical level, but then also lead this work conceptually, yani, or practically in their work. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses and protects our beloved teacher, Dr. Sohail Hanif, protects the work that he's doing and allows the Ummah to continue to benefit from his ilm, and that we are able to also, inshallah ta'ala, carry the burden and the weight of this challenge with you, inshallah, as we become more educated and more informed about the subject of zakat and its many very serious implications for the health of Muslim communities, both in the West and across the Muslim Ummah. I want to wind down, inshallah ta'ala, by thanking the Center for Islamic Knowledge. We host programs like this all the time. This is part of our CIK Talk series, put together by the wonderful team at the Center for Islamic Knowledge based in Toronto, Canada. And alhamdulillah, if you want to see some of our previous talks, you can only need to look at our website. We are working on uploading them to YouTube, inshallah ta'ala, so that we can benefit in perpetuity from the expertise of people like Dr. Sohail Hanif. Our last talk was with Dr. Khairuddin al-Junaid, who I was a discussant for. There are many talks on many subjects, and so it'll be a great repository for Muslims who are interested in all things Islamic hate. And so with that, we thank you for attending, and we'll finish, if we would, Dr. Sohail, with a short dua that we request of you, inshallah ta'ala, so we can have a husn al-khatimah for the program.
I just want to give my thanks to Sheikh Mahmoud Muhammad. It was a really very thoughtful exchange. Really appreciate your contributions throughout. It was a great pleasure and very educative for me to speak with you. Many thanks to the organizers and those who were present. Ask Allah to accept from you all. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل. اللهم أصلح أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم فرج عن أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم ارحم أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم استر أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم اغفر لأمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم اجبر أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا. أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. والحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.